Ladies and gentlemen, this is your Christian heretic coming to you with another episode of I Have Questions. Now, last week there was a tragedy where a young teenager took their lives. I don't mention the names of people so recently deceased out of respect for their families, but also out of respect for their memories. But this was the last one that I could sit in silence on. When I was looking at this whole thing and just decided, okay, now something has to be said because this problem isn't going away. And the issue is not so much LGBT come, but the issue really becomes more about the Orthodox, God, and how this all seems to fit together. What I have noticed after years and years of talking to people in the LGBT and fundraisers and people trying to raise awareness was one question that is in fact the title of this episode. What is an abomination? Now, if you go to any internet source, they all seem to agree on the modern, i.e. neo-Christian definition of an abomination, that which is detestable in the sight of the Lord, that which brings disgust, arouses hatred, things of that nature. But for me, I never really asked that question. What is an abomination? And one of the things that I like doing with words that are particularly new to me is to take the definition of the word and then use that definition in place of the word given its situational usage. Now, I'm going to read a passage out of the Bible here, which should look at the definition of the word abomination and should fit right in with what the word usage is. Now, I'm reading right out of the famous book, Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 12. And that verse reads as follows: Whatsoever hath no fins or scales in the waters, that shall be an abomination unto you. Now, my position on this is very simple. If the word abomination actually means that which is detestable in the sight of the Lord, that which brings disgust, that which brings hatred, are you seriously telling me that shrimp is something that is detestable in the sight of the Lord? I'll say it ain't so. Because shrimp, lobster, crab, I don't look at those things as detestable. I look at those things as, hey, what's for dinner? So for me, this definition of detestable, bringing forth hatred and disgusting in the sight of the Lord, just doesn't seem to fit. And that is just one instance there. But in the King James Bible, the word abomination is mentioned 142 times. In the New King James translations, the newer versions, the ones that are younger than I am, the word abomination shows up 152 times. And I'm wondering where they got the 10 extra gratuitous usage of the word abomination. But as I was doing my research and looking at all of those instances, seeing where the definition could be used, i.e. the neo-Christian definition, what I ended up settling on or realizing, what was revealed to me, was that when the word abomination was given to Moses, it didn't mean then what it tends to mean today. The definition of the word and the way it is used in the scriptures, the word abomination is used to describe anything that, quote, is not in keeping with tradition or not part of the ritual. Now, for those of you who are remembering scripture, Aaron lost his sons because they were making a sacrifice that was not part of the ritual. God just immediately killed them. You can't do anything that is an abomination as part of the ritual. With regard to Leviticus chapter 11, verse 12, whatsoever hath no fins nor scales in the waters, that shall be an abomination unto you. I look at that as, well, that's not part of the Hebrew tradition. But we're not Hebrews. And it's not mainly the Hebrews that are putting out this onslaught of hatred towards the LGBT. This is Christians doing this. Not just any kinds of Christians. Christians, pretty much anytime you turn around in America, the Orthodox has nothing positive to say about the LGBT. Never mind the commandments that Jesus left, saying, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And the commandment that he left at the Last Supper, saying, love ye one another as I have loved you. So in the tradition of the teachings of Christ, it seems very clear to me that any persecution of anyone who comes out as part of the LGBT community would be held as an abomination to the teachings of Christ. That's just my line of thinking, only because I've just given it a little bit of thought. But if the Orthodox is not keeping the tradition, how does that translate to me in my everyday life? Now, as I was growing up in the church, there was no higher authority in the land than the moral authority, and the moral authority had manifested itself as the church. As I grew up, as I grew older, there were things that I just could no longer abide in the church. When I was approached by an individual, let's just say one of these missionaries that was coming out and literally trying to get people to go to their church, he asked me if I would go, and I simply replied to him, no, I've outgrown the church. And I wish everybody could have seen the look on his face, because he literally took a step back, eyebrows raised, and asked me, how could you outgrow God? Now, the woman who was with him understood exactly what I was saying. I didn't say I outgrew God. I said I had outgrown the church. But he couldn't see the distinction. And that seems to be the problem that I see many people who look on their own lives in the LGBT with despair, people who are staying in the closet, people who are ashamed of themselves, people who take their own lives because they just don't see the distinction between God's love and the church's abhorrence to anything that's different from them. So next week, I'm going to talk about where this might have come from. But please keep in mind, the church will let it be known that whatever the church holds true on earth, God will hold true in heaven. The Bible and the scriptures do not support that. If you don't believe me, go into Revelations, and I challenge any one of the viewers of this episode to find one instance, just one, where Jesus, the Lord, looks at the churches and says, that's the one that's doing it right. That's the one that we should follow. Because from my reading, there wasn't a single church that the Lord saw was good. However, there's always salvation for every single one of us. And if that isn't a testament to God's mercy, then I don't know what is. But I also knew that I couldn't abide in the church and earn salvation. As always, this was just a little moment from me, from the heart, to those who maybe know someone in the LGBT, are in the LGBT, but not yet out. Share this with other individuals. Share this with as many people as you possibly can. An abomination is not what we were brought up to believe. It wasn't what I was brought up to believe. An abomination is the definition that fits in every single instance 142 times or 152 times. It is something that is not in keeping with tradition, that which is not part of the ritual. It just takes the sting out of it. It took the pain out of the word abomination. It describes something that just should not be taken personal. This is part of a tradition, part of a culture, not a person. And if you're watching this and you're part of the LGBT, or you're thinking about coming out, turn to the scriptures. Every weapon you need to fight this orthodoxy is in the Bible. There is no position against you that they can take and be in keeping with the teachings of Christ. Don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. I did. Persecution of anybody, just because they're a little bit different, is not in keeping with the commandments that Jesus left. And it is an abomination. As always, I'm your Christian heretic, reminding you that it is of Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing in mystery, but it's the honor of kings to search out the matter. I'll be with you again next Sunday when we start talking about where this trouble all began, where this started, and how it trickles down to the rest of us today. So if you like this video, again, this is one that's from the heart, hit +1 or like this video, share this with your friends, share this with as many people as possible, because the more we talk about these things, the harder it is to keep them a secret. I'll see you next Sunday.